Great. So really exciting to welcome you today. We will be letting folks in bit by bit and get started very shortly. We have a significant number of registrants, lots of folks who will be listening to the recording later, but also just really excited about those of you who could make it live. It's a very dynamic session, including with breakout, Q&A, and more. And curiosity, just where are folks zooming in from? We generally have, I know Catalyst 2030 generally has a very global following. So it would be wonderful to see where folks are coming in from. London,
Yeah, me too.
Brussels. Rosie's actually based in London. New York, India. Oh, this is gorgeous. Idaho. Brilliant. Santa Barbara, Greece, Denver. Ooh, and I'm seeing
Venice.
some great, I'm seeing some beloveds, some sector beloveds in here. Thank you guys for being here. This is phenomenal. I'm zooming in from Boston, still experiencing a little bit of jet lag from being in Egypt, which was an incredibly powerful experience sailing down the Nile, birthplace of feminism, and Refuge Point, also Boston-based, a beloved client of Black Fox, and member of Catalyst 2030. One of the things that we did that Catalyst 2030 did was open up the session to the Black Fox Philanthropy community. So we're not only seeing the robust Catalyst 2030 community, but lots of folks from the Black Fox Philanthropy Network, friends, colleagues, clients. So welcome all. It's really exciting and to cross-pollinate. It matters so deeply that we support each other in this work, because let's face it, the stakes are very high. The work's never done. I don't know about you, but I work very much Zoom based and often feels like we're in a silo. So getting to come together in community in this way is very, very powerful. So really exciting to see the numbers here. So it is 10:03 my time. And I know people are going to be hopping on bit by bit, but I think it makes sense for us to go ahead and get started. It is being recorded. So again, welcome sector leaders, dear friends. So grateful you're here for the Fundraising Masterclass, Crafting Convincing Funder-Centric Communications. It is an honor to be invited by Catalyst 2030 to contribute to this community in such a robust way. These fundraising sessions are part of Catalyst 2030's learning series, which has been developed in response to the membership's request for fundraising capacity building. And it is always such an incredible honor to get to collaborate with Catalyst 2030 and supporting mission drivers like you. Black Fox, I'm Natalie Rexstad, I'm the founder and CEO of Black Fox Philanthropy. And Black Fox Philanthropy is a B Corp social enterprise. We exist to serve leaders like you and your SDG missions around the world. We're also open source with trainings intentionally designed to be largely plug and play, like this one. So those who cannot afford to engage services with Black Fox Philanthropy can still be equipped to be very successful at engaging funders in a meaningful way. And we landed upon this topic of funder-centric communications to dovetail with Catalyst 2030's fundraising workshop in July. And that featured Lisa Corcoran of For Impact and her session entitled The Anatomy of the Funder Visit. So this dovetails very intentionally with that session. So really encourage you to watch that as well. And we're big fans of For Impact, and particularly that session, there was a lot of gold. So I think you'll get a lot out of that session dovetailed with this session. And there will be a brief breakout session and time at the end for Q&A. So there will be about 10 minutes at the end for Q&A. But what I encourage you to do and ask that you do is populate chat with questions that are coming up for you throughout the session. That'll give me a chance to curate some of the most relevant questions to do with this session. Maybe we'd have an opportunity to circle back on some of the other questions as well in a follow-up piece, but really want to be able to capture questions that are coming up for you as Rosie is teaching and sharing some of her wisdom and expertise. More on Rosie Urbanovich. It is such a joy to introduce her formally. She is a longtime Black Fox Philanthropy team member. She's our communications lead. She graduated cum laude from Chapman University with a degree in communication studies and received her MA in global ethics from King's College in London in 2013, and she remains based in London. Following her studies, Rosie relocated to London permanently and began her career in fundraising and communications, working on a diverse range of missions from disability to healthcare to human rights and sustainability. And through Black Fox Philanthropy, we serve all of our clients, literally serve all 17 SDGs. And as the communications lead, she is our sort of expert outside eyes, making sure all of the communications toolkits really reach that Black Fox Philanthropy standard. And alongside Rosie's fundraising communications career, she works as a lecturer and college instructor on ethics and impact, focusing on areas such as aid and development, effective altruism, and the future of doing good. And with that, I will invite you, Rosie, to take it away.
Thank you so much, Natalie. And hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this fundraising masterclass in creating compelling funder-centric communications. As Natalie said, my name is Rosie, and on behalf of the entire Black Fox Philanthropy team, we're so pleased to welcome you today. As Natalie said, I have been part of the Black Fox team for over 2.5 years now, and over that time, I've supported dozens of nonprofits and NGOs crafting their messaging. I've worked in the nonprofit and charity sector for over 10 years, and I'm also an instructor of ethics. So later on in the presentation, I'll provide a very brief overview of how we can underpin ethical ideas into our storytelling and our fundraising. But today, a big part of today, we'll be going through Black Fox Philanthropy's 3-step core message development process. And we'll also give you some time for reflection and a breakout session to think about your organization's own core elevator pitch. But before we dive into our message development process, I'm going to quickly run through a few top-line things that we at Black Fox find funders are looking for most throughout your communications, as well as run through some questions that we tend to ask our clients before beginning to work on their messaging. So I'll dive right in. So the first two in this list are really about developing authentic narratives about why your work is yours to do. We talk about effective fundraising speaking to both the heart and the mind, and this is really about that heart piece. So some questions you can ask yourself to help facilitate this narrative around that personal connection to the problem and connect you to your mission include, what originally drew you to this work? What was the most exciting for you in the early days of this work? Or what impact to date are you most proud of? Having really strong responses to these questions is all part of truly connecting with your donors and establishing your personal why, which leads into your organization's unique identity, why this work is uniquely yours to do. If we want to rewind one slide, I'm going over those four. So that's number 2, the unique identity. So this leads into your organizational why. Some of these questions that your team, or your board can include: what do you find most compelling about your mission? Or what's at stake if you don't solve these issues? Or what sets you apart from other organizations doing this work? Asking yourself and your team these questions will not only assist you in approaching funders with authenticity, but really help you to develop your overall fundraising narrative. And Black Fox has a really great blog exactly on this topic, which I think will pop in the chat if anyone wants to read about sort of developing this unique identity and your personal why. Which leads into credibility, why you are the organization to solve this problem. So the previous points are really about heart. Credibility speaks to your organization's capacity to do the work. So you can say this is really the mind piece of speaking to both the heart and mind. These are often very factual and objective and can include asking questions like, are you very clear about the tangible resources that you have available to you? How about the unique expertise of your leadership, your board, or staff members? Or where else have you received funding? If you've received previous grants from credible foundations or organizations, this speaks volumes to your accountability and your credibility to do the work. And lastly, impact. So data, as to be expected, is overwhelmingly important to complement your storytelling. You all know surveys and reports throughout the social sector name impact as one of the top 3, if not the most important considerations for funding. We find that for organizations, especially in the early stages of their life cycle, there can be a tendency to only track what they're accountable for based on your current grants. So what's often the case is they sort of back into their metrics based on their current funders, or they just don't track much at all because it's just never been asked of them. So we find that when they look to engage new funding sources, it's really difficult to then create this cohesive narrative around the data or their lack of data. So we'd really encourage you to be proactive and get out in front of this, even if you're not in a place to invest in sort of really robust data collection, which not many organizations are. You can begin to think about what those metrics should be, or in a perfect world, what you would be tracking based on what you're currently doing. So now that we've had a very quick run through of sort of 4 top line things that funders are looking for in your communications, let's dive into our 3-step core message development process, which, when we weave all of these 3 sections together, can create your organization's funder-centric elevator pitch. So many of you will already know the traditional formula for nonprofit communications is problem, solution, impact. It's actually a really great model, and we do use it to a certain extent in pieces at Black Fox. But when we're thinking about funder-centric communications and setting our clients apart from all of the other wonderful organizations doing similar work, we find that building messaging around 3 categories, who we are, what we do, and how we do it, is more conducive to the narrative, which we know goes further with funders. So once these fundamentals of identity, work, and approach are articulated, we're then able to go back and tell the story of problem, solution, impact with greater precision, as well as draw stronger connections to those universal themes that drive action and connection. So let's dive right in. So the first section is the who we are, which we also call our identity statement. This is your organization's first chance to really distinguish yourself. The identity section creates a very clear distinction between your identity and your work. The example that we like to use with clients when we're explaining the purpose of this section is when you meet someone new at a party and they ask you to tell them about yourself. You wouldn't necessarily go straight into your profession or what you do for work. You might start with your hobbies, your family, or other aspects of your identity. So this should be true for your nonprofit as well. This bucket is really about your core philosophies, your core beliefs, your values, and possibly your origin story if you feel this is relevant to your work. Some organizations feel that their history is very, very relevant, some not so much. We also push clients to be very clear about where they belong in the ecosystem. So another way to put that is it's just as important to define who you are not as who you are. So we like to ask clients from the get-go how their work could be typically mischaracterized, which actually in turn tells us a lot about who they are. So are they a systems change organization, or do they purely exist to deliver programs or services? It's really important to have clarity about your identity and what you're looking to achieve. Today, I'm going to be sharing examples from a really, really wonderful organization we worked with last year, Zoe Empowers. Here's the identity statement that we crafted with them. Zoe Empowers is a global network of local organizations equipping orphan children, vulnerable youth, and the donors who support them to move beyond charity. Note that this statement starts with a core descriptor. They use global network, but think about what key descriptor that you might use. Collaborator, convener, social impact organization, catalyst, movement builder, the list goes on. It also really reflects their core belief, and this was very apparent in all of our kickoff meetings with them. They truly believe that donors need to move beyond charity and towards self-sufficiency. Which leads to the next bucket, which is the what we do, or the work bucket. Many organizations want to jump straight from the who we are to the how we do it. It's tempting to go straight from outlining your identity and then start highlighting all of your amazing programs and your unique approach. At the end of the day, when you think about what you do, you think about all those tangible programs. But the missing piece is that aspirational statement. Your what we do should be inclusive of the problem you're solving as well as the outcomes that you're creating. So in other words, think of this bucket as your mini compressed theory of change, which shows how you expect outcomes to occur. So when you're describing what you do, this is really focused on goals, outcomes, aspirations, what you are actually doing. We're not yet talking about the specific nuts and bolts of your programming. You're describing your work, but not your approach. So as I said, that role of aspiration is really, really key in making this distinction. It's where your mission and vision meet action. And this piece helps a funder or supporter truly connect the dots between your vision and your programs. So that being said, with this section, I would say there's absolutely no time for modesty here. We see a lot of organizations get to this piece of their messaging and want to use words like, well, we seek to do this, or we aim to do this. And I say get rid of that. We can absolutely empathize with the concern of not wanting to overpromise. But again, this is the spot for you to be aspirational. The more aspirational you are in your work, the more reasons funders have to support you. And here's the example from Zoe. We disrupt cycles of poverty among vulnerable youth through a peer-led program in which participants help one another become safe and healthy, skilled for long-term success, and able to lead meaningful lives within a supportive community. Note that the ultimate end goal or vision statement is not going through their programming, but that they are disrupting cycles of poverty. And I often like to begin this statement with a verb. And while you get an idea of their programming in this statement, this is really articulating their objectives. Lastly, the how we do it section, or your unique approach. So here's where you identify the specific levers your organization utilizes to affect change. Again, this is your distinguishing feature. While there are many organizations that are likely addressing your issue area and who may even share the same vision of the world as you, you are the only one doing so in this particular way. So some pointers here, the rule of threes can be really helpful here. Can you bucket your programming into 3 areas? More is okay, but it's just not as easy to remember. And another pointer here is focusing on jargon-free communication. This is still not the place to list out every single program or aspect of your programming. That all gets introduced later in what we call your secondary messages, which I will get to in a bit. If you really try to rattle all of that off in an elevator pitch, you'd probably put the other passengers to sleep. So keep in mind that your core messages should be simple and conversational enough to say out loud, and maybe even in real life. And a quick point on accessibility. There's a common misconception that when approaching funders, we should use academic and flowery language. But when I see nonprofits present jargon-filled language that isn't concrete or easy to grasp, I don't usually think, oh, this is so impressive. I think they might not have it figured out just yet. The simpler and more concrete your messaging is, the more confident you sound, and easier it'll be for funders of all backgrounds to feel like they really understand what you're trying to do. Remember, your core messaging or your elevator pitch is what you are meant to use for every funder in every situation. So not all funders will understand jargon or specifics about your sector. So here's the Zoe example. We focus on self-sufficiency from the start by organizing mutual support groups who receive modest inputs and training from the Zoe network and local community leaders. Over the course of our 3-year program, these young people take responsibility for their individual and collective growth, achieving sustainable success across every area of life and empowering others to do the same. You can see how they outline how their approach sets them apart by focusing on self-sufficiency and empowerment. But audiences will also see that their core approach is a 3-year program, as well as just how important their network is to their work. Now that we've gone through each of these 3 buckets, I just want to revisit and highlight where our messaging process informs that traditional storytelling model of problem, solution, impact that I mentioned at the beginning. So let's talk about problem. We know that the social problems that you're working on are very complex, they're very nuanced. But when you've often done the difficult work of defining who you are, what you do, and how you do it, you can then define the problem in terms that will help the donor see a direct line to you as the solution. So in the Zoe example, the problem is apparent in their identity statement, that many organizations and donors are focused on charity and not self-sufficiency. It's also reflected in their work statement, that reliance on charity then creates cycles of poverty. In both the work and approach sections, we are setting Zoe up as the solution. They are the disruptor of this cycle, before then listing out their impact or outcomes. You can see that by retrofitting this problem, solution, impact scenario with a clear sense of identity, work, and approach, you're telling a fluid, cohesive story and setting yourself up for success with funders. So these core messages really form the foundation of all of your communications, and every subsequent step becomes easier as you work to fill out and layer upon these central descriptors. At Black Fox, our next step is to progress to what we call secondary messages or talking points. We think of the core message exercise as sort of a deep breath, capturing the essence of your identity, your work, and your approach with an inhale. And secondary messages, by contrast, are the exhale, when you fill the room, so to speak, with added color and dimension and detail. So the concepts represented in the core message by perhaps just a single word or phrase are then explained with a full statement in the secondary messages. You can then pick and choose these talking points depending on what funder you're in conversation with or what proposal you're working on. Once you've established these messages, the good news is that the hardest part is over. At this point, you have what you need to tell your compelling organizational story. So now we're going to give you 2 minutes of reflection to think about your own organization's elevator pitch, your identity, who you are, your work, what you do, and your approach, how you do it. After those 2 minutes, we're going to send you into breakout rooms for 10 minutes to discuss what you've come up with in small groups, and then possibly encourage a few of you to share your elevator pitch after the breakout session. And just for context, and as a disclaimer, this process can take several weeks, sometimes longer, with organizations that we work with. So no matter what, we're going to be very impressed with whatever you've come up with today.
And don't be shy. One of the things that we talk about at Black Fox Philanthropy in the really early stage is doing it ugly. That we can get so much gold and like the essence through the time pressure, through the, we don't get in our own way through overthinking things, trying to create the polished version. So it could be interesting to, if you could share out that ugly first draft. And then maybe that's something we at Black Fox Philanthropy can take maybe offline and workshop with you. So that would be a nice little pro bono extra for those who want to be brave enough to share out their ugly first draft.
So we got a volunteer here. So Russell, you want to do your thing real quick? Oh, now I got 4. Ooh, I don't have time for all. Russell, if you can unmute, or we'll go to Rachel.
Sorry, apparently I can unmute now, but I wasn't able to before.
Sorry about that.
I couldn't unmute earlier. I'm unmuted now.
Oh, great. Go for it.
All right. This is what we've been using with our case for support. I'd love some feedback on how we can get identity into it. It's just at To Ukraine with Love. We leverage a network of partners on the ground in Ukraine to identify what everyday people whose lives have been disrupted by the war with Russia need, and then fill those needs as quickly as possible. We are nimble and agile, responding to needs as they arise, and getting assistance to communities within a matter of days. We work on the front lines in eastern Ukraine, providing food, shelter, and underground transportation out of Russian-occupied territories. We build houses in western Ukraine for displaced families. We feed the elderly and other vulnerable populations. We provide, we provide life-saving medical care to the wounded. We distribute tactical and protective gear to the civil defenses forces and medics fighting to keep their land free. To date, we've delivered more than $1.6 million in aid to Ukraine.
Excellent. My first thoughts are just because you had said you were working on that identity piece. So what struck me is sort of your agility and what you said about being nimble and responsive. That to me feels like very core to your identity. And also what I would love to know as part of your identity is when you were founded. I mean, I can make an assumption that perhaps you were founded this year, but I think that origin story would be key here. And just how impressive that impact is in such a short amount of time. But I absolutely think your agility, your responsiveness, that's sort of your unique selling point to me just from listening to that. But as Natalie said, if you did want to workshop anything, our emails are going to be at the end of this presentation. Do feel free to email us and we'd love to sort of go back and forth with you on that.
So Rachel, you're great. Rachel, you're next. And we just lost Rachel. Unmute.
There we go. Thank you. Institute for the Future is the world's leading futures organization. We were founded in 1968 by some of the technologists who developed the ARPANET, the precursor to the internet, and have always been interested in the social impacts of technologies. Our mission is to prepare the world to create better, more equitable, and sustainable futures. We see that the world is suffering from a crisis of short-term thinking, and we work to disrupt this cycle. We do this through teaching Foresight Essentials classes to individuals and organizations. We conduct research to inform multiple sectors, corporate, government, philanthropic, and nonprofit sectors to make a better future today.
Wonderful. I love that. And I think what spoke to me is absolutely your credibility. You led right in with how you're a leading organization when you were founded. I think with regards to the second piece, I think you might be able to cut a few words out of there instead of sort of we are aiming to prepare the world to create sustainable futures. We're creating sustainable futures and disrupting cycles. I think you get right into it. But overall, I thought that was really great. Thank you. Should we do some more, Debbie?
Tusami, if I pronounced your name correctly, you want to unmute and share? I know we might have just lost you with Wi-Fi. All right, Sarika, your last, and this will be the last one. Apologies, but please put yours in the chat. We'd be happy to try to look at those.
Hi everyone, this is Sarika. I'm the General Manager for the World Toilet Organization. World Toilet Organization started in Singapore in 2001 with an intention to bring a change in the sanitation sector. At that time, sanitation was considered a taboo topic. This was founded by Mr. Jack Sim, who is a Singaporean, and his advocacy initiative led to the creation of the UN World Toilet Day, which is on 19th November, and it's also the founding day for the World Toilet Organization. Since then, we are advocating safe and sustainable sanitation at the global level. We work as an advocacy-based organization, advocating improved and safe sanitation facilities for everyone across the globe. We do it through an event called World Toilet Summit. We do it in different countries every year, and with an intention to bring a policy level change. This year we are hosting it in Nigeria, which is on the event is on 18th and 19th of November, hosted by the president of the country and with support from Ministry of Water Resources and Ministry of Health. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. That was excellent. I think my main comment it sounds like you're a wonderful, impactful advocacy organization that's created a lot of impact around the world. My main comment is sort of the level of detail. A lot of those points would be excellent for what we call the secondary messages, or sort of input into specific proposals or for specific funders that might be interested in something like, the World Sanitation Day. However, for the core message, I would really focus on, that advocacy piece and your origin story and sort of how you are implementing policy level change. But overall, that was really great. Thank you so much for sharing. And as Debbie said, unfortunately, we have to stop with the examples there. So thank you so much for all of your examples. I wish we had time to hear from all of you today. But I'm just going to go right into the last section of this session, which is just a little bit about crafting ethical communications. I'm just going to broaden it out a little bit into talking about ethics in your communications and your fundraising. These are really just some concepts and ideas to keep in mind as you develop your messaging. And one thing that I will say is there's really no one-size-fits-all approach. This is not a do this or do that. These concepts are really supposed to guide you as you create your specific organizational messaging. So there's a whole lot of discussion and buzzwords in our sector right now, as well as a lot of different theories applied to philanthropy and fundraising. So I'm not going to go into ethical theory, but one thing that I will say about ethics, especially applied ethics, is this overall idea of do no harm. No matter how many academic theories and concepts we can apply to our sector, to philanthropy, to the social sector, the idea of doing no harm is prevalent throughout all of them. It's really important we take this concept of doing no harm to our communications as fundraisers, especially when we are nonprofits working directly with communities or grassroots organizations on the ground. So our communications outputs may be the only authentic content audiences see of a local community. So while this is a very powerful thing, it also means that we must always strive for accurate representation of a community and amplifying the voices of the groups and people that we're working with in an ethical way. So the first concept that I'm going to go into is this idea of framing. So what is framing and what does it have to do with ethics and what does it have to do with fundraising? So framing essentially shows how language and experiences bring to mind certain associations and how these associations can then change the way that we think and how we feel about something. So this is a quote from a UK-based organization called Health Poverty Action. from their resource, Communicating Justice and Solidarity. And if you are interested in this topic, I highly, highly, highly recommend checking out this resource, which is going to be linked to in the chat, because I've taken a few examples from this resource that I'm going to talk about today. And we've also included a link in the chat to another really excellent resource on framing called the Framing Equality Toolkit. So an understanding of framing helps us consciously examine our communications for potentially unseen harm they may be doing and seek more helpful alternatives. Language is key to creating change and showing that it is possible. This isn't just about specific language, but about images and overall messaging as well. So what are some practical ways that we can underpin framing in our communications? The first concept that I'm going to go into is this idea of othering. Othering means using language that distances another group from ourselves. So in other words, creating an us and a them dynamic. This can be extremely subtle, but it can also explicitly paint the picture for an audience that they are victims and we are saviors. So whenever we create messages, we need to be as inclusive as possible with all of the actors that we're communicating about, highlighting the similarities between us and others instead of the differences. So how can we do this in practice? Because this is all very theoretical right now. We can actively bring people into the frame. So instead of saying poor people or sick people, we can say people living in poverty or people experiencing poverty, or instead of saying sick people, people denied access to healthcare. So while this is subtle, this immediately bridges that gap between us and them. And it also avoids this conflation of someone's identity and their circumstance. So language matters, especially in our sector. We use a lot of traditional words around helping and giving, but we need to be very intentional about how and when we're using these kinds of words. For example, we're not giving anyone a voice, we're ensuring voices in a community are heard. There's a lot of language around charity that can be disempowering to the communities that we're working with, so we need to be really intentional about how we use this in practice. And this applies to images as well. We've likely all heard the term poverty porn, which is a type of fundraising imagery that presents people in communities as unable to help themselves. As fundraisers, we know this might bring in short-term donations, but overall it can do more harm than good long-term. It's not only unsustainable, but it strips people of individual autonomy and dignity. Those two concepts are really the most fundamental concepts in the field of ethics. Which brings me to my last point, avoiding presenting our organization as an isolated entity acting alone, but instead focusing on collective action. So this can be just as simple as using words such as with or alongside. So working with or working alongside, or standing with, standing alongside, instead of using a word like helping. And instead of saying, donate now and help end poverty in Bangladesh, you could say, stand with women in Bangladesh as they work to tackle poverty in their own communities. This is not only avoiding problematic frames, but you're painting a fuller picture for your audience and for your funders as well. Some organizations might worry that changing this framing sort of eradicates their role, but it doesn't. It shows audiences and funders that we're invested in long-term sustainable change while respecting the autonomy of the communities that we're working with. And just a final note on this, if you have a strong identity or who we are statement, this should really solve that problem for you. You shouldn't need to rely on presenting yourself as the only viable hero in this work. You've already unpacked your messaging about your unique and authentic reason and your organization's why for doing this work. So by unpacking your organization's identity means you can totally avoid some of these issues. So this brings me to the end of the prepared content for today, but we'd love to continue the discussion, and Natalie will be fielding some questions from the chat.
Yeah, so we invite you to, great, unmute myself. We invite you to post your questions in the chat. Rosie is clearly an expert and available to help workshop through any questions that are coming up for you around some of the content that we've covered today, and even panning back to more communications things in general that we haven't been able to address today, just because of the limited time. You can imagine the amount of time, quality and quantity of time that it takes to really craft beautiful, strong messaging. So let's see. Great. And thank you for kind of putting some of your messaging already in the chat. We hadn't planned this, but recognizing how much pain folks are in to do with fundraising and communications being such a key part of that, we are happy to tackle some of the languaging around some of the things. So just kind of cutting and pasting some of your key messaging, mission statement, and more. We're happy to reflect that back with perhaps some suggested edits, but please be sure to put your email address in with that. So no, Rosie, you were so masterful that there were no questions. We just covered it all. So one of the things to do with Zoe Empowers, what we really we've shown a light upon their work and sort of the how we worked on their messaging over the arc of a period of time. Typically, a fundraising toolkit is between 6 and 8 weeks with a lot of back and forth, the core messaging, secondary messaging, which is the underpinning for the rest of it, like the one pager, the pitch deck, call script, as well as the grant template and LOIs. So I think one of the things, Rosie, we hadn't talked about this, but Zoe Empowers did agree, is to actually in the follow-up materials, maybe give the actual full fundraising toolkit so that you can see what it looks like, not just sort of the highlights that we touched upon today, but the entire full deliverable of the fundraising toolkit. And as I said, we, Black Fox Philanthropy, we exist to serve missions like yours, but we also recognize that so many organizations could never afford to engage with us. So being open source, there's this webinar, there's many others. So again, that plug and play, seeing the Zoe Empowers full toolkit can also just sort of be that guide as well, because we couldn't get granular with each and everything that we do over the arc of 6 or 8 weeks, but that'll be a good guide as well. Question. Okay, I'll hop into this question. In crafting funder-centric communications, how do we advise nonprofits to think about the connection between funder program areas and the work that we do? So in parentheses, we never want to force fit, but also want to be smart about drawing out the connections.
That's a great question. So how I would answer that based off the conversation today about developing core messages. We always advise that your core message or your elevator pitch is going to be the same for every single funder. That's your identity, that's who you are, and that's not going to change. But absolutely, if you want to sort of retrofit areas of your programming for a specific funder, we do that in what we call the secondary messages or talking points. So we will have specific, we have a section called sort of the need or the problem, and usually about 3 or 4 issues that your organization is addressing. And in that, you might be able to sort of cut and paste or retrofit that for a specific proposal or for a specific funder. I absolutely appreciate the not wanting to force fit, but I think usually you can find, if you're working on, a specific area, especially if you're a systems change organization, so many of the crises that we're facing are overlapping. And if you might not specifically be a climate organization, but you absolutely would still be in line with a funder priority on climate. It's hard to answer without specifically knowing your organization and what funder you're talking about. But I would say your core messages always remain the same, but absolutely retrofit your secondary messages for a specific funder or issue area.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and with advancement outreach, so we also serve an extension of client teams where we take on the email addresses of the clients working as an extension of the staff. One of the ways we really demonstrate to funders that we've done the homework is layering in some of their own language. It's not mission creep. It's actually speaking in their own language in a way that really lands as well. They know their stuff. They've done their homework. That alone sets you apart from 90% of the communications they get, where they're kind of getting sprayed or just kind of more of a dog and pony, look at us, versus this is how we dovetail. And we share the North Star here. And I was inspired to reach out to you because of your deep work around X, Y, and Z. So even, kind of being layered and textured and demonstrating the homework can be very funder centric. Again, not mission creep at all, but how they tell the story of their North Star and how you tell the story of the North Star may differ. So you might want to just map to that. Again, sharing the same North Star, so it's integrous, but it does get that yes, so that you can go deeper into the conversation, and that's the goal. So let's see, another question here. I do see we have a lot of numbers and some India specific jargon. Would love feedback, but want to know how okay is it to mention numbers? And so I guess my curiosity then, Suruchi, this is Suruchi Pawar, is at what stage is it okay to mention numbers? There's core messaging, numbers, and then there's secondary messaging numbers. So Rosie, if you want to distinguish between the two.
I think you're probably talking about numbers as in impact numbers. I can't find the question, but I would say that in your core messages, we don't normally use impact figures unless it's a very sort of general figure. So we've supported over 10 million partners or what if, you know, something since your founding, but we usually wouldn't include specific impact data because in your core messages, you're very much focused on that theory of change, on your outcomes, on your identity, and not so much on specific data. We do have an impact section in the secondary messages, but unless it's really, really key to your identity and sort of, you know, founded, you know, 10 years ago, and since then we've supported over 500 organizations, that's fine, but we really wouldn't go into the nitty-gritty impact data in your core messaging.
Yeah, great. Here's a compelling question. From Ruby Jewett, our founding story is somewhat graphic and mentions triggering content. How should we approach this in our comms?
That's a great question. And again, it's a little bit challenging without knowing your organization and the content. But I would reiterate that with the core messaging, you do want to have that elevator pitch that you feel comfortable and confident sort of speaking in any room. And I think that triggering content, depending on what it is, because again, I don't know the context, you might want to save that for a specific proposal or when you're reaching out to a specific funder who might be an expert or in that area. So I would say in your core messaging, I would probably avoid content that is exceedingly triggering because you do want to be comfortable to use it in any situation.
Great. And then let's see, question here from Patrick Struble. You mentioned that the use of language is important, and I fully agree. What's your view on overused words like sustainability, systems change, etc.?
That's a great question. I wish I had the perfect answer to that question. It's really no one size fits all. So I think that some organizations want to use buzzwords because it feels like they should be. And what we'll usually do when we're refining their core and secondary messaging is really drill down what you're actually trying to say, or what can you give me a couple of similar words or adjectives for this, and we can possibly transform that into something that might be less buzzwordy. In some situations, that is, you are working in sustainability or you are creating a future that is sustainable. No matter how buzzwordy it is, it fits for you, and that's okay. So I would say don't avoid entirely, but ensure that it's right for you and right for your identity in your organization.
Great.
And I was going to say, I think that might have to be the last question due to time.
Exactly. So with that, thank you, folks who have put some of their messaging, their language in the chat. Rosie and I and the communications team will, with pleasure, reflect back some suggested edits, things along those lines. But with that, just wanted to thank you for being here today. Thank you to Catalyst 2030 for inviting Rosie and me and Black Fox Philanthropy to contribute. It is always an honor to teach. And I think with that, we'll turn over to Catalyst 2030 for some announcements.
Great. Well, thank you again for both of you for joining us. We absolutely love this partnership and all this extra time and energy that you give to the Catalyst members and to the Black Fox Philanthropy groups. Couple of things, poll, we're going to launch the poll right now. Feel free to fill that out. We love your feedback. It also proves that the impact that we're making in our series are working well. And also, if you have any questions in there, you're available to have open-ended answers now in Zoom polls. So please do that. Next, I want to do the take-home learnings from what we've learned today with Rosie and Natalie. I love what Rosie talked about, the problem solution impact formula, to always match that problem solution impact in what you're communicating with who we are, what we do, and how we do it. And remember what Simon Sinek talks about, the why we do what we do. If you understand and inherently understand why you're doing what you do, when you're communicating to others, it will be more concise and more clear. Ensuring that you're distinguishing yourself from those other peer organizations, what makes you unique, is a big win. And that clear messaging we found is very impactful. So as you're in the chat, some of you gave your actual statements. We love that Natalie and Rosie and team's going to look at those and give you some feedback. So be sure to share your email as well. But we will also share a couple of samples when we do those follow-ups. And in our email that we send to you in the next 2 days with the video from this session, we'll include a couple examples too that Rosie and Natalie think are great. Ethical responsibility and embodying the dignity of storytelling. We love the storytelling. It's compelling. We all know that. But being ethical, being honest in our work is very important as well. The next thing we want to let you know about is we have this amazing grant writing series that we're working with Lendesa and some donors and social entrepreneurs on doing. The dates are here, and the links to register are for the next one coming up is in the chat that Sherry added. So we'd love to have you join us. This is for Catalyst members only. So I would be remiss if I'm not sharing some Catalyst 2030 information. Those that are Catalyst 2030 members, please don't forget to do our membership survey for the end of the year. We're at 182. We'd love to go over 200 members. And then lastly, for those that are part of the Black Fox Philanthropy Network, we would love for you to join Catalyst 2030. So we put in the chat about Catalyst 2030, and there's a slide here talking about the impact of Catalyst in our members. We're almost at 2,000 members. We've only been around a couple of years. 2 billion people have been impacted through our members' work. It's been simply amazing to watch Catalyst and what's happening within Catalyst as well. So thank you once again to our amazing speakers. We've been thrilled to have the two of you with us. We'd love to answer any questions that you have. Feel free to send us emails. And then also we have all the Catalyst 2030 social media channels if you want to hear about other opportunities, events, etc. So thank you once again. We will be looking at the chat and getting back to everyone. Unmute and say thank you to our speakers and have a wonderful afternoon, evening, or morning.